Okay, so what I'm going to be talking about today is really how DHHL is implementing the things that Claudine went over today. Um, so we know a little bit more about the environmental review process to be dangerous, um, but some of this is to help keep the guardrails on. Okay, so this is our process. Yes, it is a lot, and it does look a little bit overwhelming, but not to worry. Most of the steps are actually ones that I do along with our consultant team. But for the next 30 minutes, I do want to talk about the pieces that are important for DHHL to be, particularly the DHHL staff to be aware of. Okay, so the next slide. Okay, so look, I've already eliminated like most of them. So you just have like a few sections at the beginning that I need a lot of help with coordination, and some stuff at the end that I need a lot of help with coordination. So we're gonna look at that upper box at the very top. You can go to the next slide. I think I just, so the first few things that we're doing is we need to figure out what the project is, who in the department is going to help do the work, where the actual construction stuff, like where that stuff happens. So we're going to look at that top box. So the very first box on there is identifying the project for HUD. So you can go to the next slide. Next slide. Sorry. Normally I click through, so. Okay, so we need to identify projects that will be receiving HUD funding. So there's a couple different ways that these projects are identified. The first one is we're directed by the chairman. So these are projects where he'll be like, hey, Lehua, we're looking at this project. We want to use a whole bunch of different types of funding. One of the funding sources that we want to use is NAHASDA. So often, Chairman Watson will try to stack different types of funding sources so that he can leverage out and maximize our funds that we get from Act 279 or our trust funds by using other funds like NAHASDA and other federal funds so that we can maximize what we can get for our dollars. So for projects that are directed by the chairman, I will say these tend to be the higher priority projects because once he figures out that he wants to use it, then we got to go. So for our consultants, I apologize up front, but I'm going to be asking you to work miracles for me because these are the ones that were like, okay, we found out, and yes, we need you to do this in 4 months. So I will work as hard as I can with you to help the process move along, but just recognize that for all of our consultants, you have at least one of these that has a very, very tight timeline. And so I am going to mahalo you in advance for working with me on those. The second way that projects are identified is if they're included in our housing plan. So every year, Lehua submits a housing plan to HUD, and some of those are in that housing plan. So over the last several years, NAHASDA has looked for different types of ways to provide beneficiaries with opportunities and help them improve their financial situation. So one of those types of examples that is in the housing plan was the COVID relief programs that we did during the pandemic. So those are an example of something that's in the housing plan. Some of them are super fast, and we can do those. Those are like the hour ones, and they seem a lot of them can be very administrative in nature. So like the COVID relief plan, that one was a pretty quick one for us to do. Other ones, we have a new program that we are releasing very soon, and this is to provide refinancing for families that might be subjected to lease cancellation, so they can refinance their home loans. That one seems super administrative because you're like, well, you're not doing anything to the ground, so why does it matter? But that one, just because it does fall into that kind of acquisition or leasing category, is one of those bigger environmental reviews that Claudine talked about. So although that would have been awesome if we could have done that in a week or two, that one, I think we just submitted to Claudine yesterday for HUD to do their 15-day review. And that one, I would have loved for it to have been quick, but it probably took us 7 or 8 months to get that one from start to finish. Well, almost finish. Okay, direct inquiry. These are ones that Meleana and Aloha and Anne from NAHASDA work very closely on. So these are ones where families will inquire directly to us and say, hey, I have my lot, I was awarded my lot, and can you help me with financing? So they want to build something. Or there's somebody that is, my family has lived on our homestead for 5 generations. We moved in 1927 in Ho'olehua, and our house is falling down around us. So either we're gonna demolish that and build a new one or do some repair. So the direct inquiry ones, you would think because it's just an individual lot with just one house on it or just building one home would be shorter. But unfortunately, just sort of the environment here in Hawaii, because pretty much anywhere that you go, there will be endangered species. There are, as a Hawaiian organization, it's very important that we are looking at our cultural resources and we aren't just like plowing over them. So those consultations just take long. And so even though it's, you know, kind of the lower level with the CEST, the categorical exclusion subject to, as opposed to an EA, the difference in timing between those two maybe is like 2 weeks from start to finish. So some of the timing that Claudine shared, realistically, the shortest that we could ever finish a CEST is 90 days. And that's really because that is the minimum amount of time for consultation. That doesn't include me writing or anything. That's, you know, the consultation that's required for us to do Section 106 with State Historic Preservation, our consultation with Fish and Wildlife, you put in the public notice, you put in the comment, the review period for HUD, and that equals 90 days without doing anything. So just to keep that in mind, I mean, 90 days is like, I would love to be able to get that efficient. And so you all can help me do that. That would be great. Okay, the last type of project that we would have, these are ones that planning and land development division, both of those two, often the projects are in their areas. And then I say, hey, you know, I think maybe is this something that we might want to consider using the HASDA funds for? Can we just like tag on right now, like right at the very beginning, as opposed to coming in a couple months later or 4 years later or 5 years later? And so right now, what we are really asking for planning and LDD and pretty much all of the various divisions and offices within DHHL is, if you have a project that is going to put houses, you know, on the ground, let us know, because we can at least do the environmental review. And if we decide 2 years from now that we're not going to use NAHASDA funds, doesn't matter. We've done the review. But if in 2 years we don't do it and then we decide, hey, let's use NAHASDA funds here, then there's all sorts of weird hoops I have to jump through, and then I feel, you know, like it's like, am I doing this right? Can I do this? Okay, Claudine, I got to call you and talk to you about this again because I'm not sure. So let us know up front. The plus about letting us know up front is that often we can use NAHASDA funds to pay for your Chapter 343 EA. So look at it as sort of a win-win. Like, we will pay for that, just let us know up front so that we can do our part at the same time. So while Claudine had one of her things to say, her mantra over and over again, my mantra is please let us know as early as possible because we want to jump in at the front end. Okay. So the next one is what entity within DHHL is assigned. So the biggest thing here I want to say is I want to cooperate with you. So I think there's great opportunities for us to work together. And within the NAHASDA team, we have a lot of great expertise. And so we can help with things like coordination with SHPD on, say, 6E for that project that you probably have to do anyway. So, you know, we've sort of developed a really good relationship with SHPD. We have kind of our own quirky way of doing things with them, but they like it. And I've been told by other entities and consultants that, you know, oh, you should never combine 6E and 106 to SHPD. And that is the only way we do it, because they respond that way. And so, you know, after years of doing it kind of separately and piecemeal, we do put it together. They appreciate it, and we get things through their process pretty quickly. So again, this whole cooperation thing, we will scratch your back, you scratch our back, we'll scratch yours. Let's work together so that we can get these projects going. Let's see. It is terrible being blind. Okay, I think I actually did get everything on that in my notes. Okay, this next one. This is a big one. Okay, so determine project scope and preliminary project description and all funding sources. Okay, so these are all things that Claudine talked about, right? So the what are we going to include in the project scope? There's a couple ways you can look at it. You can say, I'm going to include everything and the kitchen sink. Like, I don't know what's going to happen here, but I'm going to include everything. I'm going to include the offsite infrastructure. I'm going to include the roadways. I'm going to include everything. You know, we're going to do homeowner financing. We're going to do refinancing. You can put in everything. The other option is to say, this is a really complicated project. This is a huge project, and there are a lot of potential issues. I only want to cover my tiny little section. So you can go either way, but we have to be very clear as to what way we're going to go. So for projects where I don't know what we're gonna do, but we know generally the entire thing is gonna be housing, I usually include the kitchen sink. If it's a project where we're working with a partner and it might be on their land or maybe it's on our lands, but we're only doing a very, very small component of it, then that's where I really do limit it. And that's really to make the NAHASDA portion of the project easier. So times when I will do that is, say, for example, there are endangered species. So we have some lands that actually have critical habitats on them. It doesn't make sense for me to include that as a NAHASDA project. We can do it with other funding and not use federal funds, and that will just make it easier. Sometimes it's ones with historic sites on it. It just really depends. So if I am working with you on it, my very first thing is going to be, what is the project scope? And let's figure out the project description. And I am not joking where I have had some projects that take 4 or 5 months to figure out the project description. I do not like that personally. I would like to figure it out sooner. But if you don't figure it out up front, it just makes for a real headache in the back end. So that's the critical piece. I sort of also included the where in that with that limiting the scope. So I think we're to the next slide. Okay, so this is determining the level of environmental review. So Claudine talked about the various levels. We have the super easy one where it's exempt and I can do it in an hour. And then we go all the way up to EAs. Typically, I have never done an EIS for HUD because the scope is generally pretty big. So if it's for a housing project, it's more than 2,500 units. So our biggest project, housing-wise, that we've ever done at the department is Ka'ulo Kaha'i, and that's 1,000 units. So we're not even halfway there. But the other thing that does trigger an EIS on the HUD side is if we exceed some particular noise levels. So if we're above 75 dB, decibels, that automatically triggers an EIS. So typically, if there is a project like that, I recommend to Lehua that we don't use NAHASDA funds for it, because it's just there are other funding sources. So when I am looking at using NAHASDA funds, my recommendations will generally be, okay, will this make for more work and make it harder? Are there other types of funding sources that we can use? So those are part of the questions that I often will ask up front for people that we are partnering with, because I want to know if it truly makes sense to use NAHASDA funds. And there are some projects where I'll just say, yeah, no, it does not make sense. On the individual units, the types of projects that I will advise against using NAHASDA funds are often ones that are in flood hazard areas. So you might have a family that needs to rehab their house, and maybe they are kupuna, so they have some ADA issues. And because of their location, we need to raise the house 10 feet. That adds a lot of complexity. So we would have to put in an elevator to be able to satisfy the ADA requirements. So it sort of just snowballs. So when there are projects that I recommend against, it's not because I don't like that family, or it's really because if you can do it with other funds, then some of the requirements that are required for us to use NAHASDA funds go away. And so it doesn't make sense. It doesn't pencil either for the department or for the family, because if they're paying for the loan, that loan maybe changes from $100,000 to $200,000 just because you're adding an elevator and some others and elevating the building. Okay, so I sort of got sidebarred a little bit on that, not following my notes on here. Okay, so there's the two different tracks when we're determining the environmental review. So the first one is that individual lot. So we're talking about that house that needs rehab. And when we're doing that first track for the individual lots, one of the things that we've started doing, we've done it for a couple years now, and it's not required by HUD, but we do it so that the family can know right away if they can use NAHASDA funds, rather than going through all the paperwork of, okay, well, I need to find out if I'm income eligible. Let me get all my paperwork from all of my family members and all of this. If I do a preliminary environmental evaluation up front, I can tell them, hey, your lot is in a flood hazard zone, and I'm sorry, we're not gonna use NAHASDA funds. So that eliminates a lot of the work that they would be doing. So we do this, PEE is what it's called. I couldn't come up with a better acronym, sorry. But so we do a P check. And so we're doing, it's basically all virtually. So we're doing a check on GIS, we're looking in the county records, we're looking to see how close it is to an airport, where it is with regards to flood hazards. So all of those things. And then we can say, hey, I think this project can move forward. Sometimes that project might cost the family more. They might be in an area where, yes, there's a flood hazard, but it doesn't require us to raise their house, but they have to pay flood insurance. So that would raise their costs. Sometimes it adds additional assessments that I have to do. Like I might have to do an additional assessment because it's next to a wetland, or they're in a flood hazard area that again doesn't require them to raise their house, but I have to do an 8-step process. So sometimes it'll lengthen the time. So that PEE is we do that so that we can figure out A, if the lot is eligible, and then B, we can let the family know, yeah, it's gonna cost you more, or it will take longer, or it will take longer and cost you more. So they get all that information up front. For our DHHL staff on the on the left side of the screen, so I have that little box. We are using Salesforce now. At some point, everyone in DHHL will use Salesforce. And the concept behind Salesforce is it's a database that allows us to put information about a project into it, and then anybody that's on Salesforce can look up that project and see what's been done. So what I just have shown here is it's kind of the first steps in the checklist of things that we do as part of the environmental review. And so the first 12 or so are specific to our P-check so that we can figure out if the project should move forward or not. Okay, so that's the first of the 2 tracks. So that's the individual lot. The next one is the area-wide ERR. So this one, if we're doing more than four units, then we need to go to an EA. So we have a lot of individual rehab projects, say in older neighborhoods. I'll use Nanakuli for an example. We probably have had, I don't know, 100 inquiries in the last couple years of families that want to rehab their home because they're older. And so we can do a certain number of homes in an area before we're obligated to do the higher level environmental assessment. So we can do 4 or less and not have to do an EA. But once we hit that 5th one, then we have to go up to the bigger level. For all of the areas that are in our older homesteads, we are in the process of actually doing an overall environmental assessment for the entire area. But they do take time, and because of the type of work, it requires a different type of review. So instead of doing kind of a standard environmental review, we're doing a tiered review. And in the long run, it will be great when we have the tiered review, because it'll allow the family to come in and be like, hey, can we do it here? And so in the tiered review, we'll do a bunch of sections of the environmental assessment in the first tier for the entire area, but we won't look at things specific to that lot. Like, is it in a wetland? Is it in the SMA? Whatever those little things are. So there's certain things that we'll look at the second level in the tier, like on a case-by-case basis when that lot comes in. Fortunately or unfortunately, however you look at it, the tiered review does require us to have a programmatic agreement with State Historic Preservation Division. So, and then that gets put into tier 1. So then you wouldn't have to go back later on. So that has sort of held us up a little bit in getting these area-wide EAs done, but we do have a programmatic that has been approved. So that is a super exciting thing. And because we got the programmatic approved, that is for the federal side so Section 106. We figured, well, I mean, if we're gonna do 106, we might as well do 6E as well, because nobody can do anything in Hawaii until we finish 6E as well. So, so we are actually working on that piece too. So Ku'upua will be talking more extensively on the historic preservation stuff, so I will not steal her thunder on that one. Okay, and then a little typo here, the area-wide, if we needed to do an EIS, it would be 2,500 units, not 2,000. Okay, so next slide. Okay, so I pulled back up the map, the graphic of all the craziness that we have to do. So most of these boxes I will take care of along with a lot of help from my consultants. So again, thank you very much for all of that. But so it might seem like I ask you all these questions about what we're doing, get the project scope, and then I just go away. And you're like, okay, well, is she doing anything? And really I am. I'm working on all these different things. But what I do want you to know is that I probably will come back to you and be like, hey, I need this technical study. Have you, do you have it? Because that helps inform the ERR. So if it's already been done, there's really no point for me to redo it. And sometimes I'll get the technical study and I'll be like, okay, this covers some of it, but doesn't cover all of it. So then we'll supplement. But I really hate spending money on something that we've already spent money on. So if you are working on a project and say you already have a chapter 343 done, or maybe it's a smaller project, so you don't have, you know, like an EA, maybe you have a smaller, like an exempt level of documentation. Give me whatever documentation you have, because if I can use it, I will. And it's just, you know, one less map to pull, or, you know, one less study to do. So please share that out with me. Okay, so we're gonna go to the next slide. Okay, so we looked at the top stuff. The consultants and I are working on all these dark gray boxes. And so look, we only have a few boxes left, right? So we're chugging along. So oh wait, let's just go back one slide. Okay, so the boxes on the left and the right, they are really very similar. So I'm only going to talk about the ones on the left side of the screen. I guess that's your right. I apologize. Yeah, your right side of the screen, because the boxes really have to do with what level of review we're doing. So the ones on your left really are included on the ones on your right. Okay. Okay, so what Claudine has shared during her thing is until we either get authorization to use funds from HUD, or if it's a lower level environmental review and we don't need to get their authorization, but we are allowed to use funds. So once we meet that point in time, then yay, we can spend funds, right? So that's exciting. But we did cover this a little bit in one of the questions. In the environmental review process, we will identify if there's mitigation commitments, and we are obligated. If we commit to a mitigation, then we are obligated to do that mitigation. And so the most common mitigations that we get are for species protection. And pretty much if you live in the state of Hawaii, there will probably be at least one, because seabirds pretty much fly everywhere here. So it's, I mean, unless you're doing something that is, you know, housing counseling, that type of thing, you know, like if you're doing any actual work, you will most likely have some sort of species protections. The other one is for inadvertent fines. And then the last one, if you're doing any sort of rehab, would be hazard abatement. So what's really important is that I will be working with you, but it's also incumbent on the DHHL staff to make sure that they are getting me their information when they're, you know, I'll send out the mitigation plan, but what we need back is, okay, now please give us your construction documents. We do have inspectors that go out, particularly on the individual ones, to check to see where we're at, if we're following what we're saying we're doing in the construction plans, as well as hazard abatement. All right, let me see. Okay, oh, the last, a little bit of point that I did want to say. For the mitigation plans, we started doing that in 2021. So if we have a project that's older, and we'd have a ton of NAHASDA projects that are older, so like I think we still have like one more lot in Kanahili, so that, which is right here. So that one, the ERR was completed in 2005. So we do not have a mitigation plan for that. And when I say we don't have a mitigation plan, that doesn't mean that we don't have mitigation commitments that we've identified in the environmental review record. We just haven't made a separate plan that pulls everything together that we can hand off to people to make it easier for them. So we are doing the mitigation commitments. It's just that it's not in its, you know, its own little pamphlet. So for the older ones, we don't have a plan. a specific separate plan. One day when I have time, I will do it for all the old projects. So don't hold your breath. Okay. All right, so we've gone through the mitigations. Okay, so in addition to mitigations, we also have inspections. Next slide. And I basically what I want to share here is provide everything to NAHASDA, to me. So if you're doing pre-construction work, send me your reports. If you are in construction and you have inspections, send me your reports. After construction, you have some inspections there, send me your reports. When in doubt, send me your reports. Okay. So now we're done with inspections. We've built everything out. We have a couple last things. Next slide. So these are not necessarily specific to an individual project, but Claudine did talk about them. So we do monitoring and we also do reevaluations. So for annual monitoring, that is a requirement for us to do self-monitoring. We don't just do it on the environmental review records, we do it on the entire NAHASDA program. But I'm probably the one that'll come by and be like, hey, can you help me on the environmental review portion of the self-monitoring? So typically planning is, they have been the workhorse for me in helping us do the self-monitoring and environmental review. But what I do want to ask all of you is, we do not get better unless we know what our mistakes are. And so I'm totally fine with you telling me I did something wrong, because I can't fix it if I don't know. So please feel free to let me know. And I probably will be really upset initially. I mean, I won't tell you that I'm upset, but I'll be mad. And then after like an hour or so, I'll be like, oh, okay. But so please tell me, because I do think that our program is better now. And the reason it's better is because we are working to fix our past mistakes so that we can be better in the future. And I can only do that if I know what I'm doing wrong. And it could just be, hey, Malia, you could be more efficient if you did it this way. So yeah, no matter how big or small, please let me know. The other thing that we do kind of after the fact of, kind of getting the ERR complete is we do need to do reevaluations. So any of our big projects, we have never finished them in 5 years. I don't know of a single one. And that is, I will say that's not really a function of DHHL. It's really not. Like Ho'opili over here, they're still building. They're 15 years in. They're not close to being done. Another good example is Mililani. It took 45 years. So it's just how we do things here in Hawaii. We take our time, make sure everything's good. But the ERR has to be reevaluated every 5 years. And so over time, we've come up with a better process in reevaluating so that we're really looking at the things that could change. So one of the things that often changes is, unfortunately, we have new listed species. And so something that was not an issue 5 years ago is now an issue. So we do the reevaluation internally in-house. But what that does mean is I may come to DHHL staff and be like, hey, let's talk about this, and then figure out how to move forward on it. Because sometimes that does require changes in the mitigation plan and how we respond to that. The other reasons why we would do a reevaluation is if we find something out that changes how we're doing things. So again, this is also where, hey, I think we did this wrong, comes in really helpful. So a lot of times with really big projects that are, many, many years long, there are things that happen that, maybe I wasn't even here when we started them. So an example of where we were doing a reevaluation, it was for a water project, where somehow over time there was a 500-foot extension to where the water line was going to go to. So it got to include another house. But that wasn't in the original evaluation. So we had to reevaluate it to make sure that, okay, everything is copacetic with it. So, you know, I'm very happy to go back and fix something if we didn't do it right the first time. Because if I find it and fix it, it's much better than if Claudine finds it. So tell me if something is wrong. Okay. I think that is it for me. Any questions?
You were saying that if it's in the special flood hazard area, in the SMA, that sort of thing, that it may be too expensive to do a rehab of a house. Could we use NAHASDA funds to do flood mitigation and then do like letters of map revision so that they become eligible?
I mean, technically, yes, we could if it was tied to the family. So yeah, if we needed a LOMAR for a particular house, we could do that. The question is, though, going through that whole process, if the only reason why they're going through that process is so that they can use NAHASDA funds, are they better off looking for other funding sources that aren't going to add? Because doing a LOMAR takes forever. You know, like it puts them, 2-3 more years back. So it's not that we can't do it, we can, but it's important that our families know what the implications of us doing it are.
And to follow up, if there were multiple NAHASDA eligible families in the same situation, could we do it for a group of them, as long as I'm guessing it was 5 or less?
I mean, we could do it. So for example, we can use Nanakuli as an example. So Nanakuli is in the SMA, portions of it are, but those portions that are in the SMA, that's actually the only issue. There's a raised reef in front of Nanakuli, so they're not subject to from erosion. They're beyond the shoreline setback. They're not in the in the VE flood hazard area. So the only thing is that at some point somebody arbitrarily drew the SMA line, and probably not properly when you think about it. It doesn't make sense that there's extra special management issues for that area. So yes, we absolutely could. And we are working on that tiered review for Nanakuli. So I haven't gotten to that point yet in it. But it might be something that we consider for kind of that area-wide one. I would probably rather do it as an area-wide EA than to do it individual house by house, as my personal preference.
But just to add to what Nancy is saying, I'm not sure if she's referring to Kapa'akea on Molokai. And I think the concern with Kapa'akea is sea level rise. So I think some of the concern is, are we gonna put NAHASDA funds there if sea level rise is only gonna come? Is it more appropriate? And I think these discussions are taking place, is if the families would like to relocate elsewhere, might be a better use of the resource, because the concern is that if those homes are only gonna be underwater, is that a good use of NAHASDA funds? So I just wanted to.
Yeah, so my recommendation for places like Kapa'akea on Molokai and Kekaha on Kauai, they are not just SMA issues. Those are also flood hazard issues and areas where they are impacted by sea level rise. So remember how I said up front, like I may tell a family, hey, I don't think this is the right choice using NAHASDA funds. In general, for Kekaha and Kapa'akea, that is sort of my standing, we're not using NAHASDA funds here. And it's really because, does it make sense for us to fix your house? And yes, we could meet that 20-year time horizon for whatever that repair is. And then in year 25, your house washes away. It doesn't make sense. So when I look at evaluating projects for, for using NAHASDA funds, I'm really looking at it as, okay, this is my family's house for the next 199 years. Like if you just got awarded, that's how many years you have. Like, granted, I can't crystal ball what's going to happen in 199 years, but if I can tell that in 40 years it's going to be underwater, then it's not a, I personally don't think it's a good choice. And I would much rather that family live somewhere else. And so I will push that as far as I can. Do we have any online questions?
I should have added one thing under Claudine's section. I was going to add it under yours. You guys talked about the Native Hawaiian organizations that DOI has a list. I just also wanted to note, this is more especially for the consultants or partners. DOI also has a list of homestead beneficiary associations, as well as, I forget what the other one is. It's basically for applicants on DHHL's wait list. You may also want, you should also include those contacts to inform about projects. And I know the NHO is the basic list, but I know we have lists in addition to that, like the homestead associations in the area and such. So I just wanted to mention that.
Yeah, okay, so I can follow up a little bit on that. So when we're doing our consulting, particularly for Section 106, yes, the obligation is that you must use the DOI NHO list, Native Hawaiian Organization list. And you can look at it based, because it will give you, okay, this organization is interested in everything in the state, or they are only interested in the Waianae Moku. So, if they're only interested in the Waianae Moku and you're doing something in Waimanalo, do not include them on the list. Nobody wants to get like a billion things that they're not interested in. So definitely need to look at the DOI list. But there are also a lot of our homestead organizations do not have, they're not on the list because they chose not to be. So, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't include them. So when we're doing our consultation, part of that consultation is actually talking with planning to make sure that we capture all of those other organizations that aren't on the NOI list or DOI list, excuse me, and include them. The other thing that we also do as part of kind of our initial step with historic preservation is we also give them that list of the organizations and individuals that we're planning on consulting with and asking them who else we should consult with. And we will also ask for your own personal experience. Like, I am not from Maui, so I don't necessarily, I can get the list from planning, I can get the list from Department of Interior, but there might be other organizations that I don't know of. So we'll also rely on our consultants if they have other entities that they think we should add to let us know. All right, I think we're good.